All right. Welcome, welcome. Happy Monday to you all. And I hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Got, four of my favorites on today. And Mark Wilkinson, great to see you out there. Clint, great to see you as well. Great job, by the way, Clint, on Friday's CIS call. I'm going to be talking about that briefly as we do just a touch of banter here and let everybody come on in. As I mentioned, the CyberCall is now also in a podcast format. So what we're doing post-event is we not only have this go right up to YouTube where you can watch it over and over, but we are also downloading the audio. I'll put a URL in so you can see it's on every major podcast player. We hear folks listening to it during their mowing their lawns, Phyllis, and other weekend hobbies and things like that. So we're glad we can be with you during those festive times at home. So in regards to the podcast, this week's title is Risk, Revenue, and Responsibility, the vCISO's real job. And I'll do some who's here with us. We'll do want to touch a banter and then get on into today's subject. So with us here today are David Primer. He's the CEO and founder of Cynomi. We have Brian Blakely, who's had numerous roles in the MSP space, from owning MSPs, multiple MSPs, to owning a really very successful vCISO company with a successful exit just a few years ago. And now he helps Compliance Scorecard on the professional service side as their chief risk officer. Net Lynch, welcome back to the States. You were over abroad, Italy and all these different countries for, I think it's 78 days. So welcome back to the US. And as always, VP of Content at CIS. I'm Andrew Morgan, host of the CyberCall. So that's all that fun stuff. By the way, I'm going to put in chat real quick here for you all. If you want to listen on any of the major podcast players, that's how to get to the podcast, Write a Boom podcast, which, by the way, brought all of the Cybercast stuff that we did. Billy Turner, awesome to see you. Ann, awesome to see you. All the great stuff, Phyllis, that we did, going back probably 3-4 years ago on all controls. So just so you all know, if you are looking to implement the controls, touch up on the controls, anything like that, we've had north of 12,000 people listen to the CIS Controls podcast that we did with Phyllis, Ryan Weeks, Wes Spencer, and Brian. You were part of it as well. So I highly recommend that you can find in there. So Brian, let's start off with just a touch of banter before we get into real intros and today's. I wanted to a touch of good news in the channel. So Ingram, fully operational, which they did that pretty quickly. I was really glad to see that for them and for the channel, for the people that need to rely on Ingram. They're a massive organization that supports a huge amount of the channel. I did want to ask you, Brian, and I'll put the URL to their site, their comms site up. As somebody that has had a role as a CISO for a $50 billion fintech company, you've been in the hot seat. You've had to be in boardroom meetings that are not pleasant many times, as whether a vCISO, CISO. One of the big things is comms, right? And we talked about this last week. I just like your opinion on how the comms were in this. Are you okay with it? Did they do a good job? Would you like to see different? Like these days, as I talked about last week, this is a tenuous area because people have gone to jail in the last few years. CISOs have gone to jail. Sometimes they should. Other times they're the fall guy or gal. So I'd love your thoughts on what you're seeing here.
Yeah, Andrew. And first of all, I share your sentiments in terms of genuinely being glad to see Ingram Micro back up and operational, right? I think any disruption at that scale really has a ripple effect for MSPs and really the entire supply chain. That said, I would I would I would characterize the communications as safe, perhaps heavily slanted or weighted on the legal aspects. They lack some transparency, which kind of is a ding to trust. Um, you know, I'd call them professional, but the comments and communications professional but sterile, right? I think clarity in these times and transparency are the currency, right? The phrase like unauthorized access doesn't tell me much. And working with law enforcement is again table stakes or being captain obvious. Mid-market companies and MSPs should really pay attention here. I think incidents are obviously inevitable, but trust is retained or lost during your communications. So I would counsel say what happened, what it means to your customers and what you're doing next. Ambiguity helps no one. And to own the narrative here, I think is important because if you don't own the narrative, someone else will, and they'll generally fill that in with FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So that's kind of my take on the initial. Maybe there's going to be more communications later, but it felt very safe, professional, sterile, and heavily slanted towards not balancing the legal and the transparency. You want to see a couple good ones out there. I always like to know, what does good look like then? Shopify and Twilio are a couple of good ones. If you want to do some research or look up some of the past notifications they had on a few event breaches. I'm so used to calling breaches events that I've been well trained here, not to say the B word, but those kinds of things out there in the wild. They've got a couple of good ones, very transparent, but they did a good job balancing transparency with the legal parts.
Yeah, really good insight, Brian. Also, Cloudflare, when they had theirs, they
good one. Yeah,
really well done. If you guys
forgot about that.
Yeah, putting you on the spot, I didn't ask you if you wanted to comment. And again, I know you're back. Did you look at anything? And I always like to get the MSP's perspective. Did you see it? And as the MSP, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was kind of like that pause. Oh crap, we don't know what's happening yet when the news first broke, because they are a major supplier to so many MSPs and to clients. So there was a lot of nervousness until the comms finally came out and we had better understanding of what was happening. And I think at this point, from the MSP perspective, it's like a guarded sigh of relief. Like, we're not quite through it yet. It's not quite finished, but it's not as bad as we first anticipated. Because, when a major supplier like that announces they've had an incident, you think worst case scenario first. So I think that's where we are right now from the MSP perspective.
Okay, fantastic. Let's move on here. By the way, I am putting Brian Blakely's LinkedIn in the comments section. And the reason I wanted to do that is if you are not following Brian, you really need to as an MSP. He posts probably once a day, give or take. And, he is involved with most of the time with MSPs sitting in the vCISO or CISO position. And you will find, and this is a Brian Blakely term, a treasure trove of good stuff in there. He posts about how the conversation should really go, how to tie what matters to an end, to the customer, to the executive, speak in their terms versus how we typically technically speak. So again, please, if you want to get better at comms, communications, and driving revenue, take a look at Brian's site. So let's get on into today. Let's do a few quick intros. First off, David, first time on the CyberCall. It's a pleasure to see you. And for those that may not know you, congrats on building a phenomenal company. I mean, you guys are absolutely doing a great job, and I'm really looking forward to getting. This is a big topic today, but tell us a little about yourself, and then I'll have Brian do a quick intro, and we'll get going.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for inviting me here. So, David Primo, out of Israel, spent many years in the Israel cyber intelligence, about 15 years, lieutenant colonel. Small break in Switzerland to find the Higgs boson at CERN, the big particle accelerator. Did my PhD there. Then back to Israel and established a cybersecurity authority. I've been leading the technical group there, building the national cert, and then understanding it. I think it was after the WannaCry attack that there are so many SMBs and mid-market companies that are not well protected. And there's sometimes some foolish things and misconfiguration, and big companies have CISOs, and small companies, they don't know what to do. So I decided to establish Synomi and to help eventually MSPs and MSSPs to provide virtual CISO at scale. So very proud to be here, Andrew, and luckily we have a bunch of MSPs, and we are trying to help this community to go bigger, and of course to protect the ones that are usually not protected.
Thanks for that, David. Really appreciate what you're doing. Brian, a lot of people do know you, but for those that don't, quick intro of yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and thanks for the plug on the LinkedIn stuff too. But hey, everyone, Brian Blakely here. Spent the last 3 decades or so, plus minus, in the trenches, really starting as an engineer, and then founding, building, growing, selling, exiting several MSPs over the years. I'll say some of the exits were more successful than others. Then evolving into kind of a full-time mid-market and portfolio company CISO for 4 years at a fintech company and several vCISO roles, really helping MSPs and SMBs and larger mid-market companies turn really security and compliance into real business value. And I'm excited to be here today again on the CyberCall. Always humbled, Andrew, when you tap me to be on the call. So thanks again for that. And this topic too, what the vCISO role really is, and really excited to kind of get into that over the next few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, we'll let you do a quick intro, and then you can just start right into your first question on over to Brian, and I'll find that Wall Street Journal article as well that I know you're going to ask about. But it's interesting, Nat, that vCISO is starting to become a when you see Wall Street Journal do articles on vCISO. That not saying that we've reached the pinnacle, but the fact that it's becoming an adopted thing, and industry, or I should say media, is talking about it, says something. So a little bit about yourself, Net, and I'll let you take over.
All right. Hi, everyone. Net Lynch. I'm the CISO at Kraft Kennedy. I've been in tech for 30 years. The last 20 or so have been in the MSP space, focusing unexclusively on client strategy, including vCIO and vCISO, and I've sat in almost every seat in an MSP, so I know this world inside and out. And one of the big game changers was that light bulb moment when I realized, wait a minute, clients don't care about features, they care about how this solves business problems. So that's kind of how I've built the services around me since then. So Brian, first question for you. So what do you think is driving this sudden momentum behind the vCISO services? Like from a regulatory shift, like the NIS2 directive that came out for business expectations. As Andrew mentioned, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal which is normalizing this, and it's not such a situation where my IT services company is trying to sell me something. Now there's getting legitimacy behind why companies need this. So I'd love your take on it.
Great question, Nat. And I went to look at that article, and it's behind a subscription gate or something, and I'm a data privacy nerd, so I'll take your word on the actual content of the Wall Street article. But it is, to Andrew's point, that it's getting that kind of visibility, I think is important to vCISO and what that means. But I think there's a few forces driving the surge for for really vCISO demand right now. I'd say it's things like regulation, business risk visibility, and this revenue pressure. So first, when I think about like regulatory expectations, they've exploded, right? From NIS2 in Europe, SEC cyber disclosure rules here in the US. Boards and executives are now personally accountable. Andrew, you mentioned that, right? And you can't outsource that liability, right? But you can outsource leadership. That's where I think the vCISO can step in and be a big help. And I think second, risk is no longer abstract, right? Ransomware, supply chain attacks like Ingram Micro, even like we've talked about, these are now more, I'll call it kitchen table kind of conversations, right? Businesses are realizing that security isn't just an IT problem, right? It's an enterprise-wide obligation, right? They want someone who can align security, strategy, policy, and operations without hiring a $300,000 a year full-time CISO. And the last thing I think, the real tailwind, is more economic in nature, right? Companies are needing to prove resilience to win deals, right? Keep contracts and in air quotes kind of pass audits. And a vCISO doesn't just reduce cyber risk, they reduce sales friction. You mentioned that too in your intro. Now I think that's important. You're greasing the wheels of the sales team, right? By having some of this compliance stuff done. And then insurance costs and reputational exposure. So I always say a good vCISO helps close revenue and close deals just as much as they close or shrink risk gaps, right? So we're at the point where not having a security leader, if you want to call it a vCISO, whatever that is, not having that security leader isn't seen as lean anymore, right? It's seen as reckless. And MSPs that recognize that shift, I think, are going to be in a great position to lead here, Nat.
Yeah, that's great. Great feedback. So Brian, next question over to you. You built a team of successful.
I think we're.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we're over to David. No.
Oh, yep, you're right. You're right. I skipped. Thank you for that. David, hi. So there's an announcement that you have made recently with Deutsche Telekom. Pretty big announcement there. And you launched your vCISO services with them using Synomi, which is fantastic. Congratulations. So what does this signal to the MSP community globally about where the industry is headed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I mentioned Synomi, we mainly focus on MSPs and MSSPs in the US. And I think that the fact that Deutsche Telekom, as one of the biggest telcos that also has these consultancy services and sells a lot of cybersecurity stuff to the customers, decide that they want to establish the virtual CISO services, it means that virtual CISO should be a core offering within many MSPs and MSSPs. It's not a niche. It's something which is a big company like Deutsche Telekom. And I guess that you could imagine decisions like that in the headquarters of Deutsche Telekom to say that we are going to establish a new set of businesses. I think it's something very, really unique. And the fact that Synomi is there was a great news for us. They understood that if they want to provide virtual CISO at scale, and they have thousands of potential customers, they need automation, they need standardization, and as Brian said, that they need a platform that helps them to manage and help them also to generate ARR, because we understand that a virtual CISO, it's not only protecting, it's also helping the business. So I guess this big opportunity maybe a signal to other MSPs and MSSPs, hi, there is a big opportunity here, and you should step and start thinking about the future of cybersecurity services. And it's not a maybe, it's not let's see what is going on. Virtual CISO services are growing, and if you want to be, I'm not sure if it's early adopters, but maybe it's MSPs and MSSPs that want to join before the peak.
Nat, I think Eric Wells and there's Keith's made, some good comments, but Eric's like, about, allows smaller firms to leverage expertise they normally couldn't afford. One thing that, Brian, maybe you could touch on this. You've touched on this in other sessions of the CyberCall, and I'm kind of teeing off Eric's that, these smaller organizations don't think about, their contractual obligations, things they've actually signed off on that, really could mean the difference in 40, 60, 80% of their revenue, that, whether it's compliance rolling downhill, whether it's something on breach notification, data privacy. Can you kind of maybe fill in those just quick blanks on that? Why you always dig into that area? Why is that so important for small businesses?
Well, small businesses generally sell into larger ones, right? And when smaller companies do that, they usually don't have the maturity when they're reviewing that contract. We all enjoy revenue, right? And we're like, just sign the contract. But looking at your clients' customer contracts, they've agreed to all kinds of data security and data privacy requirements in there, and sometimes compliance obligations that they're in breach of. And so having that conversation, in fact, if part of your risk assessments don't involve reviewing your client's customer contracts, the contracts they engaged in, then you're missing not only risk, but you're missing golden opportunities, because a small business understands I have a contract and it's worth 50% of my revenue. And if I'm not fulfilling the obligations of that contract, I'm in breach of that contract and thus putting that revenue at risk. And so nothing's better to have that conversation, especially as an MSP that doesn't always do the best of job of articulating the value of the products and services they do. Now they can tie these products and services directly to protecting the revenue that's tied to a contract that's very tangible, and SMBs understand that, right? Because it makes a significant portion of the revenue. So instead of it being some theoretical risk, you can really tie that product or service you do to protecting their promises that your clients made to their customers.
I think the other thing you mentioned a lot too, Brian, is that it's way more compelling for an executive to hear something like that versus you have your S3 bucket where you store your data has a potential vulnerability, or like that doesn't mean much to an executive.
Yeah, here's the 8 things we need to do to shore up the weaknesses that are driving 80% of your revenue. That's a different conversation, right? And then the proposals and all the stuff that has the technical stuff and all that kind of stuff, they can connect the dots to what you said earlier when you're connecting the technical jargon and stuff into something that the business can understand, consume, and react to, and resource.
Right. Good. And so, sorry, Net, I get all pumped up here. Comments in there by Eric and Keith and all this good stuff. So go ahead, Net.
No worries. I'm the same way. Eric Wells just joined my team at Legion, so I'm happy to see he's already having an impact. All right, Brian, next question's for you. You built a team of successful vCISOs at Cogent. What made that model work, and how did you prove ROI to clients early on?
Yeah, I think anytime that you're talking about vCISO or professional services around security in general, the vCISO model we put together, I think, worked because we never led with compliance or tech or frameworks or stack. We led with the business, right? Our entire approach was built around really one simple but powerful question. And Andrew's heard me ask this a million times, right? But how does this client make money, right? Once you understand that, security stops being theoretical, right? It becomes more intentional. And the vCISO program shouldn't be a technical gatekeeper, right? It should be a strategic operation. So focusing, what we focused on, identifying the critical business functions that drive revenue, and then map the risks that could screw up or damage or destroy those functions. Usually a client only has 2 or 3 critical business functions that drive the majority of the revenue. And that's a great place to focus. And that's what we protected. That's what you measured. And that's how we proved ROI. We didn't show up with like this laundry list of 150 controls and a bunch of audit jargon, right? You show up with leadership, right? Help clients make intentional decisions about where to invest, what not to invest in or what to skip, and how to prioritize based on business impact, not just to check a box, but to move forward faster with confidence. So we delivered security and compliance strategy and execution, I'd say, with the least amount of friction possible. That's the number 2 question you always get when you talk to a client about vCISO services. How much? But how much money is this going to cost, right? That's always part of it. But the bigger part is, what kind of friction are you going to put in my ability for my team to do their work? You're going to put in controls, and you're going to recommend all this stuff to shrink risk. But at the end of the day, how is this going to impact the business's velocity to get product out the door, the services they do? So you don't want to make security a blocker, right? A business accelerator. You want to be able to push that skinny pedal on the right and accelerate the business, and always keep, and I'll end with this, keep cost top of mind. Our promise was you'll and is even today on the pro services side, you'll never spend $1 more than you have to say secure, compliant, competitive. That's being intentional with the spend. So in the end, you can kind of prove ROI, not by reducing risk on paper, right? But by helping clients protect their revenue, win deals, right? Satisfy partners, and sleep at night knowing they're not one bad day away from a breach or a lawsuit. And I think that's the real leadership net, and what a vCISO is really supposed to do.
Fantastic. David, next question's for you. Are there certain characteristics you look for in an MSP that you know will have a greater chance of success in their vCISO practice? And would you be able to share some insights on roles and processes so that all the MSPs listening can take notes on how to begin their journey if they're not already in it, or to improve their strategy?
Yeah. So, of course, it's easier to start this journey by finding some MSPs that already providing some consultancy already. So it could be risk management, or some compliance as a service, or vulnerability measurements, or any type of consulting to the customers. So the step from providing some kind of consultancy or cybersecurity professional services to virtual CISO would not be a very big step. But what we see, because most of the MSPs, let's say 30%, have some kind of consultancy, and lots of MSPs are currently want to be to provide those services. Let's call them the aspiring MSPs. I think that first they should take it really seriously, because it's not easy to provide virtual CISO services. You must understand that there is some kind of investment. We believe that the ROI will come, but you must have at least somebody who or gave some consultancy services in the past, or is willing to learn very fast. I think those MSPs that are willing to use some kind of a platform that take this journey and accelerate it, it's very, very important. The second one is, it's not a niche. So so the MSP must understand from the executive point of view that it's really something that they want to invest in. They understand that there is a major potential of revenue stream, and there is involvement of the managers, as well as some champion within the MSP that is willing to take it. Lots of times we see a problems of, okay, I want to establish this service, but how can I find my customers, my first customers? I think this is one of the things that holding MSPs to start building the virtual CISO services. And I guess it's the same problem with other services as well. I think that starting or finding the way to start with your existing customers, it's better to find the early adopters, the ones that might have some regulatory requirements, maybe insurance problem. And I would recommend taking maybe companies that already, unfortunately, have been attacked, so they understand that they have to improve their cybersecurity posture. So finding the first customers, and when trying to provide those services to the first customers, it will be much easier to progress and to add more and more customers in the future.
Net, when you hear that, what about you? I'll ask you, you've scaled and you are scaling vCISO and services. First off, what about doing it internally, the old, eat your own dog food, eat your own tacos, the whole 9 yards there. How important is that, doing it, being able to do it yourself before scaling it out?
Absolutely. And I would choose tacos over dog food. So eat your own tacos, right? If this is something you want to offer to your clients, do it internally first. Do it on your own MSP first. One, you're going to go through the controls and have a better understanding of what they really mean and what they're looking for. So when you're having a conversation with a client, you're speaking from experience. And two, you're doing a security assessment on your MSP. You are part of the supply chain. You are part of the risk to your clients. You should be doing a risk evaluation, and this is the perfect way to do it. Especially using a framework, I like CIS, and using that to evaluate your MSP, going through the controls, understanding how to collect evidence and what's going to be required for that is a super valuable
Not only
experience.
that, Nat, but I think to Brian's point, you start off with, how do you make money? Well, we know how we make money. And then you probably have, again, the 80-20 rule, right, Nat? Probably most MSPs could say, yeah, these 20% of my customers make up 80% of our revenue. And then more than likely, Brian, in the days you had your MSP, probably there's some, compliance rolls downhill. Some of your larger accounts as an MSP, right, whether it's them directly are regulated or their biggest clients are regulated, are going to start to roll the questionnaires downhill. Is that fair as well? So you're looking at it through your own lens, but then if you can get a handle on this, you can go then have that conversation with others, no?
Yeah, 100%, right? MSPs, we always learn by getting our hands on something, right? There's always this, okay, let me do a proof of concept, or let me play with it, or let me mess with it. And messing with it on yourself is a safer environment, but you do start to build up what I think is wisdom, right? You go through the process yourself and you say, hey, I looked at my own contracts and I saw this. Now I have a compelling story and some wisdom when I'm trying to sell these services to my client to say, oh, we did this on ourselves and here's where we screwed up and how we should have done it, right? There's a certain level of vulnerability there, but at the same time, you can prove you've gone through that journey. And that's extremely valuable when you're trying to, after you've done it on yourself, you've gained the wisdom, you've looked at your own contracts, you found your own stuff and you fixed it. That's always a compelling story that you can share with your clients. And clients want to hear that kind of stuff too, because it builds confidence and trust that you're able to, you've been there and done it, and you have some empathy there in how you deliver the service as well.
So, quick question, Brian, before we hand it over to Phyllis. I think we're at that point right now. But Brian, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. He's going to shoot me. It's Strive Technology. I'm sorry, dude. Just shoot your name in there. But he asked, did you actually, ask to go through your customers, contracts and, what they were committing to? Would you actually do that, Brian? And would
oh my gosh. Yeah. What I generally do is sample recent and most significant.
David.
Okay. Yeah. Recent and most significant contracts that they've signed, and generally you'll have some clients that don't want to do that. And you can say, hey, let's just do a screen share. All I want to see is kind of the data security, data privacy, and compliance requirements in there. We can black out the rest, do a screen share, or you can ask them to go through. But generally speaking, if you share the why behind it, right? The why behind is, hey, I want to make sure that every dollar you spend on security and compliance is consistent with some of your obligations and promises you made to your clients. That's the why. I don't want to quote something that you don't need. And the best way to determine these are things or products or services you're going to need to shrink risk. Hey, you've got some things you agreed to in this customer contract. I'd love to see what those are. And all I care about is the data security, data privacy requirements in there.
Would the incident handling fall in that as well, Brian? Or
Well, that's a data security requirement oftentimes. Yeah. And our clients agree to all kinds of crap in there, in there, right? They'll agree to, for example, like they'll agree to 48 hours upon any security event, right? And it's like, hey, you can counsel your client. Say, hey, next time when you're going through this process, negotiating agreement with the client, the vCISO, we'll look at those data security and data privacy requirements, and we'll give you some areas where you may want to consider pushing back. We might want to refine that to 48 hours for any event, to 72 hours, within a confirmed data breach involving the scope of data within this agreement, right? Or something like that. You would re-lawyer that, but something to that effect, because there's no way 48 hours in every event. What are you going to do? Call your client every time that somebody clicks on a phishing email or something, right? We don't want to do that, and chances are the client doesn't want that either. So might as well get some of that right. But that's usually what you're looking for.
Also, you probably want to know, like, hey, do I have the right to send down and secure? Like what
right to audit?
Right. Yeah. What kind of audit language is in there, right, Brian? Like, hey,
clients about faint when you tell them, oh, did you know your customer has the right to call you at any time and audit you against the promises you made in this agreement? And I'll tell you, I've done everything out there from SOC 2 attestations, ISO certifications, CMMC now, FedRAMPs over the years. And these client risk assessments these days are on par with that. What used to be a security questionnaire and yes or no questions has turned into this trust and verify, where we don't believe you when you say yes. We want to see an artifact or evidence uploaded here. And by the way, we also want to call you. By the way, we also want 2 days to go through these things where our risk nerds are going to talk to you guys. And we're going to want to know, they're going to want to know all this kind of stuff, right? All kinds of proof, right? We hear your words, but let's see some screenshots, some log files, some other evidence that you really are doing these things. Clients about faint when they realize they've agreed to a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, good. Phyllis, over to you.
That's really good stuff. I think, you've covered a lot of my next question. So I'll ask you, do you have anything to add on, how would you coach a technical MSP or security lead to talk about revenue and risk versus tools and tickets? And then, what qualities or kind of what services do you believe make a good vCISO?
Oh, wow. Good question, Phyllis. I tell you, every MSP or technical security leader, I tell them all about the same thing, right? If you want to earn, right, we always hear about this getting a seat at the table and earning a seat at the table. And the meme here is the Thanksgiving Day meal, where you see at the adult table is the CEO and the CFO and the COO. And at the kids table at Thanksgiving, you've got the CISO, and they're not allowed at the big table yet, the adult table, right? That's kind of the meme. And, I always tell them basically the same thing. Stop talking about your stack and your tools and your tickets and blinking lights and white noise, and start talking about revenue and risk. So here's how I coach them. First, ask your client again, how do they make money? What's their most profitable areas of their business? What are their revenue streams? Not what tools they use and how many endpoints they have, but how they make money. Then map their critical business functions that drive that revenue to risks that could disrupt that revenue. Okay. So when you can say, if the system goes down, if this system goes down, your invoicing stops, or if this data leaks, you'll lose your biggest contract. That is speaking their language. I also coach them to understand contracts, not just configurations. We've talked about contracts, right? So the best vCISOs I met know that most security obligations are packed into customer agreements, insurance policies, and regulatory commitments. So you're not just protecting a server, you're helping your client keep a promise to their customers. Okay. And I think that's what separates a vCISO from a TAM or a technical account manager kind of role. I think historically MSPs have been challenged with the little v role out there,
Right.
vCIO and vCISO. There's a challenge there. And lastly, I'll say a great vCISO doesn't create fiction, right? I've said this, friction, right? They remove it. So they guide the business to make, I think, intentional, informed decisions with the least amount of disruptions. So they don't just say, do this is the control, and beat them over the head with it, right? They say, here's why this matters to your revenue, your reputation, or maybe it's your runway. So a good vCISO brings that clarity, prioritization, confidence. And a great one, they help the business spend the least amount of money necessary to be secure and compliant. I think that, Phyllis, that's value, that's leadership, and that's how we turn techs or TAMs into that almighty proverbial trusted advisor role.
I think that's great because, when I was at the National Security Agency, and we always used to be, oh, if only they patched, if only they did this, what's it going to take? And at that time, we were pretty young in kind of like this cyber world and all that. And what we always tried to do was scare the bejesus out of everybody. You don't want to be the headline in the Wall Street Journal, but what you realize after years and years is you can't scare people into paying money and dedicating resources towards cyber. And so really what Brian said is gold. You have to make the business case for them, and you have to coach
them specifically.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is to get to know them, right? And ask questions and listen. And you're exactly right.
That's awesome. I have a question. So how long do you think an MSP should invest? Like here, you don't have a client who signed on. You're like kind of, negotiating, wooing them, showing them how great you are or whatever. Like how long? I'm not an MSP. I never owned my own business. Is this in the beginning stages? Have they already signed? Like out of curiosity, like how long do you dedicate to this process? And then you realize it's not working, or, okay, yes, it's going to work.
Is that question for me, Phyllis?
For you, yeah.
And when you say not working, could you share a little bit more about that?
I would say maybe someone's like, well, I still just want the cheapest thing ever. Like I don't want, so often on this call, we hear, how can I get my client to pay for security? Right now, we often hear also back from Gary Pica is, well, you didn't make the right business case. And so, I'm curious, like, what is the success rate perhaps that you have, maybe not what you have, and then how much time should an MSP dedicate towards creating the case for vCISO and those services that an organization should be paying for?
Yeah, in my opinion, the market's kind of fragmented for these services in 3 different areas, right? You have these people, kind of what you're talking about, Phyllis, that may never understand or get vCISO. They never see the value in it, and you're probably not going to win that case. And they might be right. Then you have this tasty top, right? I'll call it the tasty top that's just highly regulated. They get compliance. They know they need it. They have to. Then you've got this larger middle section, the meaty middle. And I think to make the business case is really getting into, if you can do that risk assessment and roadmap, and I've said this before, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but if they're even on tightest people on money, you say, hey, I've got to make sure we're intentional with your money and your budget. You don't have $1 bazillion to spend on this, and I want to make sure we get this right. And I want to make sure every dollar you spend, we can connect the dots to leadership intent and solving a business problem. I don't want to sell you a bunch of stuff that you do not need. And the best way to do that is part of the, having a risk assessment and roadmap is being able to ask the business the right questions and tease out what's important to them. Okay. And then that's usually their revenue drivers. Again, where are their profit centers? Where do they make money? And I really focus in on their hard and tight and get in there because they understand that. So everything I connect when I'm talking about risk connects the dots directly to them. And this is important. And I think a lot of us miss this, is be very specific in your conversations with your clients. And that might take a little bit of time, Phyllis, to get to know them a little bit. Mm-hmm. Because if they call a widget a gadget, call it a gadget every time, right? And make sure that when you're talking to them, you're very specific in their lingo and their industry vernacular and what they're saying, because you'll build that rapport and trust much more quickly, and be able to resonate and provide value that they can understand, react to, and put resources behind.
If I can add.
Yeah, go, David. I was going to ask you. Yeah, please, David. Go ahead. I was going to ask you.
So I think if to continue Brian's thoughts, I think it's about cybersecurity journey that we want to take the different customers of the MSP. So there are those that fully regulated, they understand that they need virtual CISO. But most of the customers, and I think that we understand that everyone needs to understand the risks. Every customer needs to have some kind of a roadmap. And I think showing the gaps for every customer, even if it's not a full risk assessment, it's partial risk assessment, something to raise the appetite of the customers to understand that there is something else than tools, something else that now they understand that they have gaps, they cannot ignore that, and then take them to the next step, maybe for full risk assessment, and then taking them to the next step of maybe compliant and picking the framework that they want to follow. So I guess it's how to educate your customers and how to build a program which is not a virtual CISO to those that understand that, but how to take or democratize virtual CISOs or cybersecurity consultancy to most of the customers. And
Yeah,
this is
David, I'm really glad you said it. Ned, I'm going to ask you this question. I think, look, for years we've relied on the all-in model, right? In other words, it's 200, it's 300 a seat, and that's what we do, and this is what we do, and that's it. And I think what we're seeing, and I mention this book often on different podcasts and things like that, which is the Jolt effect. Take a look at it. But basically what, it talks about is 60% of all qualified deals are lost to no decision. And I think the role of the vCISO is critically important because in order to win deals, we have to de-risk. People aren't making decisions because they don't see that they need something. People are not making decisions because of fear of being wrong. And a good vCISO can go in and say, hey, look, maybe this other MSP is driving you towards spending $350. Let's take a step back. Let's take a lower risk step. Let's look at, what's driving revenue. Let's walk through a risk assessment. And even if we don't do business at the end of the day, you're going to have a bona fide understanding of these critical functions in your business, the critical data, the critical outcomes, blah, 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 blah. And you can use this document. What are your thoughts on that role, like the importance of the vCISO in that capacity and how the kind of the sales model is changing in our world?
Yeah, I love this question. As Brian and David were talking, and then when you asked this question, the thing that kept going on in my head is, does your prospect or client see you as a salesperson? Is your vCISO coming across as a salesperson? If you switch the conversation to discuss risk and have a business conversation, and I agree about having your vCISO as part of the pre-sales process, one, because you're evaluating risk, because you're taking on a certain amount of risk when you take on that client, and you're also, they're getting a sneak peek of what that relationship is going to be like. This is the expertise that the vCISO that will be taking care of you will bring to your organization. That gives them a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and you're asking different questions too during that pre-sales process, right? And this is a 5-minute conversation to understand, hey, I just talked to this company and 80% of the revenue is from transaction processing fees, right? And now a lot of my communication can be targeted towards that 80% of transaction processing fees as an example. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Phyllis.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, for time's sake, David, I'm just gonna ask you quickly. So from your perspective, what's a great first vCISO conversation look like? And what frameworks or assessments really help anchor that value early on?
It starts with a CIS. Sorry,
exactly.
Dave.
I mean, not to not to lead the witness, but
I'm kidding.
Actually, we when we start an engagement, I think that it's important to follow any framework. And I think that I like the CIS. And when we talk about this, the cyber journey, I think CIS implementation group 1 start with that, and then continue to the second and the third. But what we see, the starting point of a good engagement is finding the first customers, and then doing the risk assessment. And the risk assessment can, or posture assessment, it can compose of CIS or NIST or nothing, but understand your gaps and have your first customers get your gaps, then doing the roadmap in order to find how to solve the gaps. Usually, when we join the partners, our partners, MSPs, starting to provide those services, they usually bundle the first the software with some services hours. It could be 2 hours a week, it could be 4 hours a week, depends of the type of the customer. And then it's the big decision is how to bundle the virtual CISO service. Is it separate? Is it part of the managed services? And we see different MSPs with different motions. I think what is really important is to create this transparency between the virtual CISO and the customer, and we see it with looking together on a dashboard or a report. And I think we see it a lot of times that this virtual CISO engagement and that started a conversation which related to risks and to your cyber posture and gaps. It helped the virtual CISO and the partners and the customers to understand what is the next steps. And then it helps the MSPs, of course, to close more deals, because when you have gaps, you have more revenue, you have a better conversation with your customers. And when we speak with a successful MSP, with Synomi, they saying, yeah, we now we can provide virtual CISO at scale. Now we can help more customers, but now we do more business, and it's easier for us to convince the customers to add more cybersecurity services, more tools, because we have a different, I think that we talked about that, we have a different type of conversation. It's related to business, it's related to risks, and now it's easier for us to take our customers to the next stage.
Matt, did you have models over the years? You've been doing this a long time, where you wish you're like, oh gosh, I wish we had did this differently. And then what have you learned over the years? Like, has there been a sweet spot now of how you approach it?
Yeah, I think a lot of the mistakes could fall under the two categories of under-providing and over-providing. Because I think most MSPs have some sort of an ICP. Their average client fits a certain profile. And if you build a vCISO program that is just doing the basics, right, the clients aren't going to see the value, and they're always going to want more. And if you say, well, okay, well, we've been providing, some level of security advising for you, but now we want you to buy our premium package. Like, wait a minute, what were you doing for me before that you're not doing now, right? That you're now telling me, I thought you were doing all this, right? And we hate that question as an MSP. We fear that question. We will avoid conversations for fear of that question. And the other one is making a program that has every single thing in it that every client needs to have, but they're not ready to pay for. So you're either underpricing yourself or overpricing yourself, so that the client isn't happy in either situation. So I think the sweet spot right in the middle is evaluating where your clients are. And this is something that you can do internally at the MSP level to see where your clients are and where they really need to go. And from that, build out what your program is going to be. We all have those outliers. We have those tiny little clients, and we have the few big ones. But the majority of your clients is really what your program needs to be.
So that's great, Nat. Brian, just real quick to you, roll back time. You have your MSP, MyTech, which was, which was a formidable player in Phoenix. And how might you handle that when, like, hey, Brian, I thought you were doing this. Weren't you doing this all along? Like, any thoughts on how you'd approach that if you could roll back time and you were stuck, you got into one of those conversations?
Yeah, I think that happens oftentimes when we don't have our service catalog very well defined. To Net's point, we have these all-you-can-eat things, which really confuse everybody, right? And I think back in the day, it was selling, prepaid blocks of hours that is for, hey, you can use these for anything you want, right? And then it's just confusing. So I think the better you can get and the tighter you can get on your service catalog and the menu of services you have, or if you bundle them, you can say what's included, but more importantly, what's not included. And that's why what I really like doing these days is on CMMCs forcing this maturity in some of the MSPs that are playing in that space to have what's called a shared responsibility matrix. So I think having a shared responsibility matrix to say, hey, here's the things by this bundle, here's the things that we're providing, right, for you, and here's the things we're not providing for you. And here's the things that we're going to share responsibility on. So I think having those kinds of shared responsibility makes a clear service catalog, that accordion of services well defined, and then better contracts and agreements help kind of get rid of some of that ambiguity and confusion.
So a contract, like if you're in the throes of it today, basically make sure you have a good shared responsibility model on
That's where I would start,
contract renewal. Make sure you're resetting expectations.
Yeah, that wasn't really a thing at the time I had the MSP. I mean, we talked a little bit about it, but it's not like to the forefront now. Now it is with, again, CMMCs really pushing a lot of that. But I think it's good for any MSP to have a SRM or CRM, whatever you want to call it.
Eric Woodard does it around CIS. He's like, these 40 controls are mine. These, I think it's 16 are yours, Phyllis. And then when he goes through in IG1, he goes through, that. So we've talked about that, and you can find that a lot in some of the podcast work we've done. Okay, so where are we? Back to UNet for a question or two.
We only have 4 minutes left, Andrew.
Do you want to sing for us, Phyllis, or anything?
I was thinking about it. My second career is gonna be a rock star. So
yeah, that would be the best close ever, I think, on the call.
Well, let's go with this one to both David and Brian, because this is, I think this is the number one thing on MSP's mind. Because Brian, you brought it up. It's like you've got your sweet spot. Like, they're regulated. They're going to get audited. That is not I'm not saying it's not an easy conversation, but that's a conversation you can dig into. I'm regulated. Yeah. I know I've got things I have to do. The one that I want to bounce off of you and David in closing is, how do you sell your non-regulated customers in that sweet spot, right? What are you focusing on? Let's start with you, David, and then go to you, Brian, and give you each about a minute each. David, over to you.
Yeah, so I guess regulation, it's all about being compliant. And when we talk about risks, it's different. So I guess that trying to take this conversation into, these are your risks, these are your gaps, this is one thing. I think that talking about insurance is another factor that might be relevant in cases which are not regulated. And the third one is third-party risk assessment, and maybe the other businesses that require you to be SOC 2 or to be ISO or anything like that, or even to show them that you are secured. So I think trying to understand the other business-related things which are not regulation, it's harder, because regulation, I think it's from Synonym point of view, 50% of it drives from regulation, but 50% are not. And I think it's possible, and it's expanding.
Brian, over to you. What about third-party risk management? Kicking it off there, and is that a place to look? And what would you recommend?
Yeah, or just real quick, why is a business in business? Why is an organization in business?
Hopefully to make money.
Correct. Okay, so if you can educate and inform your client that, hey, the vulnerabilities aren't theoretical, these aren't risks that are out there in the ether, these are connected to how you make that money. You mentioned that you have 2 or 3 critical business functions, and we need to secure those business functions, or you're not going to realize that revenue, right? So you're protecting revenue. You're not like defending a framework or having that kind of conversation because it's not relevant to them, but how they make money is, and those critical business functions, keeping those running and humming are important. And if you can articulate and find out what those pressure points are, I think that's the gold. And when you talk about third-party risk management, there is this, you cannot, as any organization out there, whether you're in a regulated industry or not, nothing builds trust faster with your new clients, right? We look at Amazon, and before we buy something on Amazon, we look at the reviews, don't we? Oh, I like that. They have 5,000 reviews and 5 stars. That's awesome. Same kind of thing, a third-party attestation or certification you get to it for a client. It enables them, right? It removes friction in their sales process. And I think having those requires a vCISO or some sort of leadership to lead them on that compliance journey. Again, as a business enabler, greasing the wheels of sales.
Really good. I like the way you closed that out. So we'll be looking for all your 5-star reviews out there. Make sure you get those up on your website.
For sure.
But so in closing things out, thanks first off to all our attendees and in the audience. Great chat this week. Really appreciate your support. We had a great turnout today. David, thanks for joining us for our first time. You're fantastic. Brian, as always, really appreciate you coming on, sharing your wisdom. Nat as well. And Phyllis, as always, good to see you. Wishing everybody a fantastic week ahead, and stay tuned. We'll have this out on podcast probably tomorrow. So make it a great day, everybody. Take care.
Bye now.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.